I will start from a very general, broad viewpoint and focus progressively on this institute. In fact, I've been presenting, this from time to time in various countries where when I am invited to visit and give a scientific presentation, often before I take a few minutes to explain about this institute. So there will be 4 parts, but none of them will be will be very long. One about more generally the context of maritime France and the marine research in France. And then we will focus on this institute, a unique site, and you will see quite an improbable history. And we will go from the military harbor to this research institute and finally focus on the Russian and French labs who have been here. So yes, first part. And of course, here is a map showing the location of France in Europe and in the world. And our question is, well, is this really France? And in fact, France is an archipelago because there are bits and pieces of France all over the world, as you see on this map. And because of this, and this is the interest of us because we're interested in marine research, the maritime territory of France is the second largest in the world after that of the United States, 11 million square kilometers. And as a consequence, then France is very active in marine research because being responsible of this very large territory. And we have various research organizations in France. One that is well known is IFREMER, which is the French public establishment on marine research and technological development. But in fact, most of the research on the oceans in France is not done by people at IFREMER, which is a relatively small organization, but it's done by researchers who belong to CNRS, like David here, which is the largest research organization in Europe with 32,000 people, not all in marine sciences, it's including all disciplines, and IRD, which is a French overseas research institute, and of course universities, which exist both in France and overseas. And here I will focus more on metropolitan France, that is the France that exists in Europe. And I show you on this pictures the 8 largest marine stations that exist on the French shores, 5 on the Atlantic and 3 on the Mediterranean, but there are many more than that. These are only the 8 largest ones. And out of these 8 largest stations, 3 are run jointly by the French research organization, CNRS, that I mentioned before, and a university, which is located in Paris. And it's called the Pierre and Marie Curie University, or Paris number 6. And these 3 labs, well, in fact, this university is the largest French scientific and medical university in France. And it was founded more than 900 years ago. And the main campus is in Paris, where there are 2 other larger research units, plus the 3 that you see here, that is the lab, 2 on the, 1 on the Atlantic, Roscoff, and 2 on the Mediterranean Sea in Banyuls and Villefranche. So a total 5 research units at this university for a total of about 1,000 people in marine sciences. So, of course, today we will focus on the place where you are now, on the Villefranche sur Mer. And we will look at it from both the geographical angle and also the historical viewpoint. So here we see the Bay of Villefranche. You know this bay now, right? Right here. You have been swimming in the bay, I guess, during these last days. And in fact, it is famous because it is one of the best natural harbors in the Mediterranean Sea. It is deep. At the mouth of the bay, we have 100 meters. And because of its geographical location and orientation, it is well protected from most winds. So this is why it was always a very well-renowned harbor. Well, I say it is well protected from most winds, but there are exceptions. Here are some pictures of November a few years ago, here and here. So you see it's not always perfectly quiet, but in general, it is a very sheltered harbor. And it means that since a long time, it has been used by sailors. And we know that already 2,000 years ago, there was a small city here in at about where the city of Villefranche is located now. We think it was there. It's known from the literature that there was a city, but no traces were found by archaeologists as yet. And this lasted for some centuries, but after the fall of the Roman Empire, that is around years 700 or so, most of the small villages that existed along the Mediterranean shores were abandoned because the area was very dangerous. Pirates were, sailing along the shores and attacking people and taking slaves and all that. So it became very dangerous, and the people moved in most places on mountains. And if you go in the Nice area, even not very far from here, you will see villages like this one where people took refuge and could defend themselves against pirates and other types of military activity. So it's very interesting to visit these villages nowadays. But, the Bay of Villefranche was a place of interest, and I would say the king, but he was a count of the area, which was a province at that time, wanted to secure the area, and the only way to do it was to bring people there. So he created the city of Villefranche in 1295. And to encourage people to come there, because it was a dangerous place, so people didn't want to come. So to encourage people to come there, well, he offered them not to pay taxes. And this is the origin of the name of Villefranche. Ville means city, and Franche means free, but free of taxes. And later on, sur Mer was added to the name. So Villefranche sur Mer means free town by the sea. So now you understand the meaning of the city. Some people think that Franche has something to do with France. No, it's Franc and Franche, in this case for the female adjective, means free. So, of course, now this beautiful freedom has disappeared, as you know. So, in fact, some historical event, I will not explain why it was like that, but about 100 years after Villefranche was created, it shifted countries. So it was part of Provence, as we see here. So it was, the Villefranche was at the extreme eastern limit of Provence, kind of in a very remote corner of that country. And because of political, historical events, the county of Nice joined another country, which was called Savoie in those days. And suddenly, the fate of Villefranche changed totally, from being in a remote corner of a country to becoming the only harbor, of a very powerful and rich country. So Villefranche suddenly became at the center of things, and it lasted several centuries. And it will be important for us because over these about 400 years when the situation lasted, the dukes of that country, called Savoie, created a major military harbor here in Villefranche. And this, I put some note, read the note. We will see this explains quite largely why we are here today. So after a complicated history that I will not detail, the county of Nice definitely joined France in 1860, so a little more than 150 years ago. So it has not been French here for a very long time, I would say, given the duration of millennia that we are considering. And now we will focus on the Villefranche military harbor that you have seen every day, but maybe didn't realize exactly what it was. And this military harbor is a picture taken including the various buildings that you have seen, has many components. So there is a fortress at the very end that you have seen, which was part of this military organization. And there is the protected basin, we call the DAS in French. There are dry docks. I don't know if you saw that dry dock, but if you have a chance to look at it, this dry dock is many centuries old and is still functioning. So it's very interesting. Previously, the dry dock had a roof, but they removed it at some point when the ships became taller to be able to repair them there. And there is the corderie, where you had your meals last week, which was in fact a rope factory. That explains why it was such a long building. To make ropes, you start at one end and you go to continue to the other end. So there were rope factories like that in every harbor in France, or most of them, but only two are left, one here and one in Rochefort on the Atlantic, where in the one in Rochefort you can see how the ropes were made. It's a museum now about the rope factory. So, and there were former barracks. You have seen these vaults. Well, previously there was a 5-story building over there, which was destroyed not that long ago, I think in the 1930s. And then you have the various support buildings, including the one that is just across the other garden, the Villefranche. And you have the galley prison, where we are now, which was also a hospital for the galley people. And there is the walkway, which is linking all these structures together. And there is something that was destroyed. There was a large building starting after this one, where there is the modern building now, and there are housing facilities. And it was a lazaretto. Lazaretto was a place that existed in most harbors. It was a quarantine area where people arriving and merchandises, goods arriving, were stored for some time, and the people had to wait before coming to land to prevent the spread of epidemics. So it was a very large building, and now just a small part is left, a small tower that you can see if you walk up there. You will see this lazaretto plays a part in our story. So this area, and then we're focusing a little more on our interest, was used by the Russian Navy between 1856 and 1878. We will give some details about that. And after that, very interestingly, if we think of history, it was used by the US Navy. So the 6th Fleet, which is still in the Mediterranean, was based here in Villefranche between 1945, just after the Second World War, until 1966. And an interesting detail is that the corderie at that time, where you had your meals last week, well, then it was an American supermarket at that time for servicing the sailors. So, and then when they left, it became a part of the lab. It became the physics and optics lab created, which is the ancestor of all the physics and marine optics activities that is going on here in Villefranche. So if we look at the scientific campus now in this year, in 2016, well, we have 4 of the historical buildings that are used for scientific purposes. The Corderie, the Villefranche, and this building here. And we have a modern building that is used for teaching and research that exists. And there is this new housing facility that is being built. So it means that the next time there is a IOCCG course, well, people could be housed very comfortably with a view on the sea in this new building. So we can ask the question, why a Marine Research Institute in Villefranche, and why in these historical building? So the answer will be going back to the characteristics of the Bay of Villefranche and the history of Villefranche. So we have already mentioned that the bay is deep, is about 100 meters at the mouth of the bay, but more than that, the bay gives access to deep water, which are very close to the coast. If we go just a few kilometers offshore, we have already 1,000-meter depth. And if we go a few more kilometers off, we have more than 2,000 meters. So it's deep oligotrophic waters, which are very close to the coast. And in a sense, we can study there some of the phenomena that will normally require to sail to the middle of the Sargasso Sea. But we have them very close to the shore. And it explains, for example, why the Boussole observation site for marine optics has been put there. So it's easy to service, it's close to the coast, and it has characteristics of the deep oligotrophic waters of the central oceans. And also the combination of currents and winds create upwelling of deep waters in the bay, and we often get offshore zooplankton, sometimes larger species, that come and are retained in the bay. And this is second, important point that explains why we are here. So here are some examples of the organisms that can be found in the bay that come from the deeper waters, some very beautiful plankton, and some other ones. And the French researchers at the beginning of the 19th century, as researchers in Germany, in Italy, and elsewhere in the US, started to be very interested by these strange organisms that they could find in the oceans. And this led to the establishment of first laboratory in Villefranche, which was created by 2 professors, a French and Swiss professor. And they located their lab, and I told you a few minutes ago about the Lazaret, in the last remaining tower of the Lazaret that you can see if you walk just past the lab here, past in front of the construction, and you will see along the shore this small tower, which was part of the very large building where quarantine was done in the past, servicing both the Navy fleet and the civilian fleet, civilian ships coming here. So this small building still exists, and it was where the first lab was set. But it was really too small, could accommodate just a few people. But already in that first lab, there were some guests, and among the guests, there were some Russian researchers. So now we are 1881. During the same period, we have to remember that there was very near this small tower, much larger buildings, which are the galley prison where we are now, which has a unique architecture with the prison and hospital, and also nearby, the other side of the garden, the smithy, Vieille Forge, which was one of the service building of the military harbor. So these buildings had been conceded by France to Russia in 1856 as a base for the Russian Navy. they had ships in the Mediterranean, and they needed places where they could leave various materials, including coal, for running their ships. And this was one of their bases. But because of political events, in 1878, Russia was forbidden, not by France, but by some international agreement, to sail anymore into the Mediterranean. So their ships were confined to the Black Sea, those in the southern part of Russia. And then Russia did not need these buildings anymore. At least the Navy did not need them. And then in the early, a few years later, in the early 1880s, a professor of University of Kiev. Well, Kiev now is Ukraine, and Ukraine is not anymore Russia, but in those days it was part of Russia. And then Professor Korotnev of University of Kiev started discussing with the Navy, the Russian Navy, the use of these buildings to set a lab. And he was successful convincing them. And then this is the third key point that we have to keep in mind. Why is there a lab here? Well, this is the vision of Professor Korotnev. And then from there was created the zoological station, which was created in 1885 by Professor Korotnev, together with Professor Barrois and Foll, who had created this lab in the small tower of the Lazaret and moved here because there was more space. And Professor Korotnev could get access to this space because this space was Russian at the time, and he was Russian. So it's kind of an interesting connection here. And the model that people had in mind was the zoological station, the Naples zoological station that had been created sometime before, about 15 years before, and they had the idea of create something like that here. So a station where people from various countries could come and do research on marine organisms, because it was really zoology at that time that was of interest. And three researchers then, yes, were interested in the special plankton that could be found here, because in the other places like Naples or Banyuls, plankton was surface plankton. Here it was plankton coming from 1,000 or 2,000 meters. That was, it's not that they will not fish the plankton at these, or catch the plankton at these depths, but they were brought back through the upwelling from time to time towards the surface waters, and they still do. So for all kinds of reasons, I think personality disagreements, the French and Swiss professors left, and it was left as a Russian station. And it was Russian only, or run by Russians, until 1930. Which is really amazing, because in between 1885 or 1888 and 1930, there was a Russian Revolution, there was the First World War, and the station could continue as a Russian station here. Nobody knows exactly how this could be done. They received a bit of money and they had the guests and all that, but they managed. And then the first director was Professor Korotnev, who was a member of the Nice Eye Society, which in these days had lots of powerful and rich Russians, including the Empress of Russia and such people. So it was a very powerful society, especially in winter time. People will come from Russia and from Britain as well, and Belgium and all that, all the monarchy, to have good time during winter. And the station here didn't have much money, but nevertheless it started to attract researchers from many different countries, to the point that the station became rapidly quite famous, and the well-known writer, then Russian author Chekhov, in one of his short stories, he wrote, as you can see, all serious zoologists work at the biological station in Naples or Villefranche. And it was just a few years after the creation of Villefranche, so it's like being published, now in Science or Nature or something like that. It's just quite incredible that they were so successful. And the second director was the former assistant of Professor Korotnev. He was a very good specialist of the preservation of large zooplankton through various liquids that he could use, got many prizes. And we can still see these collections. Some are here, and many are in the next city in Beaulieu, where there is a museum on the harbor about mollusks, and we can see some of these organisms as well there. And but during that second directorship, the station acquired a vessel. And in those days, when we see pictures of the Villefranche harbor, it was the only ship in there. There was not all the yachts that we see now. In those days, it was kind of the only ship, really. And so we acquired better equipment. Now, of course, for us, it's relics. But in those days, they were up to speed like we are now, with very good equipment and good books. So, and arrived a new assistant, Mr. Trigubov, and this is the name of the room in which you are now. So he arrived here in 1915, and he was a very well-educated man. He had studied medicine and biology both in Kiev and in Montpellier in France. And he was, I never met him because it was before my time, but it seems that he was very energetic and a very enthusiastic person until his death. So he was kind of the last director of the Russian station. And when the station became French in 1931, he was appointed as the first French director. So he just created the continuity. And then when the station became French, it was, the French government had to do something with it. It was a Russian station, and the only really the only university who had the experience of running several stations was the University of Paris, because they already had Roscoff in Brittany and Banyuls on the Mediterranean. So they asked the university, well, please take care of this new station. It is how we became part of the University of Paris system, which is now the Faculty of Sciences, is now the Pierre and Marie Curie University, to which we belong. And the director was Trigubov. He remained very active until his death, and we see him here, doing some deep diving in some contraption. I'm not sure that nowadays we will risk our lives in it, but anyway, he did. And he wrote a very famous textbook on plankton that people studying plankton in the Mediterranean still use. It's still the masterwork for plankton. Of course, there have been others after. And we see him with the French explorer Cousteau. Some of you know the movies this man made. And after Trigubov retired, the new director, promoted strong international development of the station. And the station at that time had acquired a ship, and it was named after the first director, Trigubov. And while I was here as postdoc, and I remember sometimes going on that ship, and what you see there is exactly the feeling we had in it. It was moving quite a lot. But anyway, so over the years, several research units developed in Villefranche, and since 1989, they are all grouped under the name of observatory. So the present Villefranche Oceanological Observatory has about 200 people with 2 research units, one about oceanography, to which we both belong, David and myself, about 100 people, so it's about half the total. And there is another group, a unit on developmental biology, so doing pure biology, smaller, and some general services. And I will say the activities are research. So both science and technological development, as you probably know now. And there is graduate teaching at the master and the PhD levels, both with our own university and for some European programs. And very importantly, there is a long-term observation of the marine environment. So inshore, that is just at the mouth of the bay, there had been observation of plankton and physical and chemical variables since 1957. So it's one of the longest time series that exists in the Mediterranean, and it is sampled every day. Since that time. And there is offshore since 1988, the creation of DFAMED Observatory and finally Boussole for the optics. So then observation is one aspect that is very important here, and the whole this observatory dedicates quite a lot of efforts to keep this observation going. And for a long time it was very difficult because everybody thought it was foolish to spend money just observing the ocean without hypothesis. But now with, of course, the changing climate, we see how important it is, and there are very few information that exists worldwide on how the ocean was even 50 years ago. So now we continue doing it. And to summarize what I just told you is that this research institute kind of resulted from the conjunction of probably three main factors. One was a unique marine site, with the direct observation of the deep waters very close to the shore. And series of improbable historical circumstances, starting with the county of Nice leaving Provence, joining another country, which led to a development of Villefranche as the only harbor of quite a major country, with the development of buildings, and these buildings later on, through the implication of Russia, became a research laboratory where you are now. So it's kind of a very improbable circumstances, but quite interesting when we see them after the fact, and also some exceptional people who had vision like Korotnev. So I will stop here. Thank you for your kind attention, and I hope that you continue to enjoy Villefranche.
Thank you. That's really a nice summary. Even for people like me who have been here for a while, it's good to go back to this and learn. Well, any reflection on that? Or, yeah, Mike.
What about researchers like Ivanov and Yerlov? I believe they spent time here as well.
Yes, this is. It goes back to the time when the American fleet left. And then the Corderie, this long building, became available. And it is where the Ivanov and other people interested in marine optics set the laboratory of marine physics and chemistry, which developed for many years, became known all over the world, and was kind of put together with the other component that was mostly developed in this building here and the one across the garden, which was more oriented towards plankton, and the two came together in the year 2001. But the marine optics is, of course, a major strength of this this institute. And now, as you may have seen, all researchers that are related to marine optics and remote sensing are still located in this long building, the rope factory, which was the French name is a corderie, corde is rope, and also in the new kind of refurbished rooms where you had last week some of the practicals which were kind of refurbished about 5 years ago or so. Yeah. So this is the component of the facility which is devoted to marine optics and remote sensing. Yeah, very major one.
When did Andre Morel start working here?
I think very beginning of the 1960s. But I think before I was in Paris and moved here, probably end of 50s, beginning of 60s. I should check that, but yeah, because he started to work with Ivanov. Yeah.
So it was at the end of the 60s when they established.
Yes, and then it was formally established at that time. Physics and chemistry, marine physics and chemistry lab, and that's where the optics started to develop.
And well, what is remarkable is that André Morel, all his life, did this teaching in Paris. So it means he was here for the research, and every week he went to Paris, while in later years it was a bit easier with the plane, but I guess he used the train quite a lot at one period. But he always insisted to do all his teaching in Paris because this is where he could get the maximum influence on the students. And not waiting for the students to come here, but getting there to talk and teach them on the campus. So it was a major effort.
Wait, why was attached to the University of Paris and not to the Museum of Natural History in Paris?
Yes, it was, from what I've been told, really because of the experience in running a large lab. Of course, the Museum of Natural History is running some smaller lab, like in Concarneau, and but there were maybe other political reasons at the time, but it was really because of the experience of the University of Paris in running marine labs. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting that you asked the question, because in fact the lab in Villefranche was considered, or was under the formal directorship of the director of the Bagnouz lab until 1970 or so. So here the director of the Villefranche lab was considered as under director of under the directorship of the director of the Bagnouz lab. So it was really a matter, I guess, of organization for the government. They had to, yeah. So there could have been other organizations, perhaps, but they decided on that one. It probably political reasons played some role, or friendships, or whatever. That I cannot tell because it happened in 1930. You know, so I wasn't there, and it's probably written somewhere, but I'm not sure. Yeah, good point.
What is the relationship with the aquarium in Monaco?
What is the?
Is there ever a relationship with the museum in Monaco?
Not directly. In fact, probably at the beginning there was even some competition because there were aquariums here open to the public. And in fact, when I mentioned the model of Naples, this was the idea, one of the reasons why there is this lab in Naples is that there was a way to fund it, which was the aquarium. When it was created as a self-sustaining institute, the one in Naples, with the rich people going to Naples and then visiting the aquarium, paying fees that will be used for sustaining the research lab. And then the French labs developed on that model in Roscoff. There was, and there is still, an aquarium open to the public, and in Bagnouz as well, and here there was. Nowadays, I think these aquariums are more a drain of money than a source of money, but in those days it was the case. So contrary to Monaco, which is generating money for the Oceanographic Institute, so the contacts were always existing, but never, I don't know if they were in any way formal. They existed at the individual level. That is, researchers, of course, had contacts with people in Monaco. And in those days, in addition, the You may not know that. The Monaco Aquarium and Museum is part of a larger structure called the Oceanographic Institute, which has facilities in Paris as well. And these facilities in the past were used for research. So they had researchers that were basically working on that model. The money was generated here in Monaco by the Aquarium and Museum and used in Paris for research. Nowadays, there is no research anymore in Paris, but it existed, well, for almost a century like that. And then there were lots of contacts, of course, between these researchers and the university and with other French researchers, so like the ones in Villefranche, and many people came from the institute in Paris to here and vice versa. So, but formal links, now we have a formal agreement between Villefranche and Monaco, but I think it was signed about 5 years ago, and it may have been the first one. But there is an interesting story about that. When we had the 125th anniversary of the Villefranche lab, we invited many important people, including the Prince of Monaco, and to our surprise, he said yes, so he came. He attended the ceremonies of the 125th anniversary. Of course, Monaco is not very far, but you know, and because he was there, well, the French government had to do something, you know, because I think without the presence of the Prince of Monaco, we will have had some very low representative of the French government. So we had some ministers. At that time, the president could not come, but there were several high-level ministers who came. And then the Prince was really the senior person, so he said, no talk more than 5 minutes. So, which is not very usual for politicians. And in fact, I gave a talk myself about the history of the station at that time, and I was allowed 10 minutes. But even the Prince had only 5 minutes, and the ministers had only 5 minutes. And after that, of course, I think that, and we had organized in the gardens exhibits, you know, with demonstrations and plankton and all kinds of things. And the Prince of Monaco, present Prince, is very interested in, you know, natural sciences and the ocean and all that. So after the 5-minute presentations, he said, well, now, okay, we will visit the exhibits. At that time, I think all the French ministers were ready to rush back, but they had to follow during about 1 hour and look at all the explanations and plankton and jellyfish and all this stuff, because the Prince was very interested and they could not leave, of course. So there are some good, interesting relations, and we keep, since that time, very good contacts with the principality. Yeah.
Well, you know, coming back just a bit on the history, maybe some of you have seen that in restaurants or different places here, some pictures of these old times. But you have to imagine this picture with maybe half a dozen or 10 big warships in the bay. And that's what was in the Russian time and the US time. That was really a big bay, not just a small ship coming once upon a time. 6, 7, 10 big warships were there. And you know, the old village, the old city where you go to the restaurant, you know, obviously was full of guys coming from these ships and doing all sorts of things. So that was probably an interesting time. I was too young to see this.
Okay, so
thanks again.
it was a pleasure. Always fun.